Today I'll be going through the Stack Overflow developer survey for 2021. I've been meaning to get around to this for a little while now because it's quite exciting to see tens of thousands of people responding to this survey and showing you the state of technology and programming and even proving some trends. So to first start off, the top 10 countries where people code: United States of America is the first one with 18%, India second, Germany third, and then we have the list of the rest. We'll keep going down. We won't stick too much for each section because there's quite a few to cover here. This one personally is not a huge surprise. America has really developed their programming community over the years, but what is surprising is 12.61%. If we're doing per capita, India probably has a lot more people programming than the United States of America, although the pay gap is real between the two. Continuing on, experience: senior executives and managers tend to have the most years of coding experience. That's not surprising at all. As you work your way to the top, it takes a while to get there, so you're programming for quite a while. That first line of code being written, 1% of people who are under 5 years of age coded their first line, which is very interesting. Not sure how those people even were able to put themselves in this survey. It must have been parents or someone else actually submitting that information for their child. Anyways, moving on, 5 to 10 years of age, 14% started coding in that bracket. Between 11 and 17 years old is when people start coding. Then it slowly dwindles off after that, with 18 to 24 years of age, the second most age range where people start to program. Learning how to code, well, this one here, online resources such as videos, blogs, and other online media, 60% of people learn that way. Now this one here is a little bit of a mixed bag because you can actually use a few of these various different ways to learn how to code. So it's not really out of 100% here. Instead, you can mix and match some of these together in order to actually learn how to code. So some people may have submitted, hey, I'm using online resources, I'm going to school, and I'm using books or physical media to do that. So 59%, again, online, school, 54%, books, about 51%, online courses, 40%, online forums, 31%, friends or families helping out each other, 18%, colleagues or friends, about 17% of people got help from them, and then coding boot camps, only about 10%. So 1 in 10 people actually go through a coding boot camp. I know that I see a lot of online push for coding boot camps, but it's quite interesting to see out of about 83,000 people that only 10% actually use the boot camps. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. Years of coding is always interesting to me because it kind of tells a tale of how people start coding and about how long it takes them to start dwindling off or not necessarily wanting to program anymore or potentially moving on to a higher role. So what you'll notice if we actually flip this so it was a horizontal bar graph, we would notice a trend where it starts going up and then dwindles down to 50 years of age. Now, mind you, some of this is out of the realm of being able to interpret because we haven't had programming high in the limelight for too many years, maybe about 20 years or give or take 5 years. So we can say most people have been coding between 5 to 9 years and continue to do so, and then it dwindles down as more experience. Another tale that this can tell is 1% of people have been coding less than a year. About 2% of people have been coding less than a year. 1 to 4 years, about 18%. 5 to 9 years, 30%. But then people either move on to different positions or roles, or potentially we just haven't had enough years to really gather this data. But what would be very interesting to tell is how this less than a year changed. If it went lower since the last survey, I'm not sure. That could tell you a little bit of a story that not as many people are interested in getting into coding anymore. Anyways, moving on, a little side rant there. Years of coding professionally. I'm in at the 5 to 9 years of coding professionally. This tells you a little bit more of a tale here with 61,000 responses. The last one had around 83 or so thousand responses, which tells you that there's less input here and gives you a different story altogether. We can see after 1 to 4 years, it actually drops down. 5 to 9 years is 27% from 31%. And then 10 to 14 years, 15%, and not as many people in the 15 all the way up to 50 year mark. Only about 8.29% of people are actually coding anywhere between 15 and 19 years. Again, this is not including education or coding on your own. This is doing it professionally and getting paid. Moving on, the next thing, years of professional coding experience by developer type. So there's tons of different developers out there. And to me, this one is quite interesting because they've really put in a slew of different types of careers and jobs. anything from a senior level executive down to a student. And I feel like this is really telling because as you get into stuff like product manager, engineering manager, senior level executives, well, of course, you've had to work for many years to get into those types of positions. Therefore, you will have coded more. So I don't think this graph necessarily tells us much. I'll make sure to post a link in the description below so you can get to this survey and check things out for yourself in more depth. But it's nice to kind of have someone to go through this information with you to really understand what they're trying to tell you. Now we're into developer types. What's interesting, this developer, full stack developer, which means they know all the little intricacies to make various different languages and frameworks work together in order to give you a full-on solution. About 50% of developers claim that they are a full stack developer out of about 67,000 responses. Then we have back-end, front-end. So of course, there's going to be a little bit of a cross between these. Some people might actually consider themselves back-end, front-end, and full stack developers because front-end, back-end can go together to make that full stack. So this one's interesting that so many people consider themselves full stack. That's a little surprising to me because a lot of companies will specialize you in roles. So perhaps they're either doing this on their own and consider themselves a full stack developer, but it's an interesting tale. I'll keep going down to education. So in 2021, most people are still getting a bachelor's degree if they are a developer. Only 3% got through elementary school, about 11.5% finishing high school or secondary school. Some college or university study, about 13%. An associate's degree, it seems like most people don't even bother getting an associate's degree, but about 2.6% there. A bachelor's degree, overwhelmingly 42% of people, and then about 21% of people, which is kind of surprising to me, get a master's degree. So let's just check out professional developers because I bet you this tells you a little different of a tale. Actually, it's not too much different. If anything, if you want to become a professional developer, it seems that you would actually need some higher education in order to do so, with some of these numbers going up, basically the first three numbers going down. Demographics. So this tells you the age of developers in the 2021 survey. Most developers are between 25 and 34 years old, 40% of them. And then the next biggest group is the 18 to 24 year olds. When it comes to gender, males are predominant in this category, almost 92%. And professional developers, actually, it's even a greater tale with over 92% of people being male. All right, I'm going to move into the technology portion of this survey. Let's talk about what technologies are being used. First off, to start, programming, scripting, and markup languages. Here's where things start getting interesting. 83,000 responses on this part of the survey. 65% of people seem to use JavaScript, HTML 56%, and Python 48%. And then it slowly goes down. But what's even more interesting is if we check out the top paying jobs, there's around 47,000 people who reported this. Clojure seems to be the best paid at 95 grand, F# at 81 grand, Elixir at 80 grand. Now, I haven't heard of most of these, which is quite interesting to hear. Perl, I've heard of 80 grand. Now, mind you, this is a median salary. That means 50% of people earn more, 50% of people earn less. And what's very surprising to me is stuff like embedded programming, which would be done with, C, is only at 53 grand. That seems very surprising to me. I would have figured that would have been towards the top of the list, but I'm sure as years have gone by, maybe those positions aren't needed as much. When it comes to databases, MySQL still on the top, with upwards of 50% of the time people are using it, 40% for PostgreSQL. This one has come up the rankings over the years, which is great. And then SQLite being the third most used. If you're looking for a cloud platform, AWS has taken the lead on this one, with 54% of developers using the AWS services. Google second, Microsoft third, Heroku fourth. When it comes to web frameworks, React.js is number one at 40%, jQuery at 34% of the time being used, Express being 24%. If you're still listening in, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe below to continue following the channel. Other frameworks here, .NET Framework is still very popular, NumPy for your Python needs, and then .NET Core, the third one, with about 34% of the time for the first two, and then 31.5% for the third most used. Other tools that people must have, Git is very high on the list, almost 93% of people using Git nowadays for source control. Docker coming in second with around 49%, and Yarn 17.73%. This one's pretty much no brainer. If you want to keep track of your code, you're probably using Git source control, so not surprised about this one. This one has remained consistent ever since Visual Studio Code was introduced. It has really climbed itself to the top. At 71% of people using it, Visual Studio, around 33% of people. Notepad++ is the next choice of IDE or way to program, about 30% of people using that, and then IntelliJ, 28.74%. What's really interesting to me is about 24% of people actually use Vim to program. Quite fascinating. Hopefully they've set up their Vim to look amazing. Here are the true professionals using Linux out there to program. Let's keep on going. Operating system, no surprise here, about 45% of people use Windows to program. But what is interesting is about 25% of people use Linux. When you start looking at a comparison of how much Windows dominates the operating system space and compare that, which is around 98% of all operating systems for computers are Windows, Linux is actually pretty high because they only have around, let's say like 1% of the market share, if that, for desktop computers. And to have this many people using Linux-based computers to develop is quite fascinating and surprising. Hopefully that number continues to grow because Linux does make it a lot easier for you to get tools, install things, and really cross-compile in a quick and efficient way. This one is an interesting one. So this is love versus dreaded. There's about 83,000 responses on this one. Rust is the most loved programming language, and only 13% of people actually dread it. And then as we go down, you notice that COBOL is the one that's actually dreaded the most, although there hasn't been a ton of responses here. 370 responses dreaded versus 69 responses who loved it. But let's see if we look at some of these other ones. C, I'm not surprised, about 40% of people love it. 60% of people hate it. Going up the ladder, Bash, Shell, about 56% of people like it. 44% of people don't. And it looks like Clojure is highly liked as well, with 81% of people liking it and around 19% of people don't. Quite fascinating to look at all this. Let's keep on going. We'll talk databases now. I'd almost called Redis and PostgreSQL almost a tie, with just around 70 to 71% of people liking them and then around 30% of people dreading them. MySQL is quite interesting for being the most used. It's actually about half liking it and dreading it, so that's kind of funny. I guess they don't want to move on from it, but I'm sure as the years go by, some of these people who dread it will move on to some other database. Platforms, people really don't like the IBM Cloud, with only about 37% of people liking it and the rest dreading using it. Oracle's not too great either. Heroku about 50-50, which is kind of shocking. And then you really have around 60% of people liking the Google Cloud, Microsoft, and DigitalOcean. And then surprisingly, the one that's used the most, actually the most people like it at 66.55%, which is significant. An extra 6.5 or 7% is quite a lot. It just goes to show you how much the user interface and how things are designed make a difference here. I'm moving on to other tools because I'm interested in this one. So Git, about 85% of people enjoy using Git, 15% don't. Docker, 76% do like using it, 23% do not. Kubernetes, around 73% like using it, 28% don't, and it just goes down the list here. Collaboration tools, NeoVim being the highest loved at 82% of people liking it, 17% of people don't, 80% for Visual Studio Code, 20% do not like it, and then Vim, about 70% of people like it and 30% don't like it. Quite fascinating. And for all of those that constantly have the back and forth between Vim and Emacs, looks like, at least for this survey, Vim wins a little bit over Emacs when it comes to people who like the interface versus not liking the interface. Take that as you will. Now we get into a world of interesting graphics and tails. Although it's a mess, you can actually go through here and see how people are shifting and transferring between languages. So for example, we could start at somewhere like Rust, and you can see people going from Java to Rust and various other languages, where they're coming from. So for example, people in Rust seem to be mainly coming from Python and JavaScript, and somewhat from HTML. Now you can go across these individual portions that show you directly how many people who worked with a specific language want to work with the language that you have selected. So for example, here, let's just go to JavaScript. 10,367 people who work with JavaScript want to work with Rust. This circle graph is quite trippy. I suggest going to check it out and seeing what other developers are enjoying using and how they like to cross over. Another one that's easier to read because there's just not as many languages or platforms is databases, where it shows you how people are shifting around a little bit. Most notably, you'll notice this one, which is around 12,500 people wanting to go between MySQL to work on PostgreSQL. Platforms, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of people wanting to go between AWS to the Google Cloud Platform, but people go back and forth quite a bit. One thing I do notice is there's really not much crossover back into AWS. So people are leaving, but not really coming into AWS. That's interesting. We'll see how that pans out over the years, whether it gets better or worse, although they are currently dominating the market. Web frameworks, moving from jQuery to React.js seems predominant here, as well as from Express to React.js, and a lot of people staying just inside of React.js. This is other libraries or platforms. These all do very different things, so I'm not going to go too far into this one. Yes, there's crossover, but this is chaos in my opinion. So we'll continue on down. Other tools, again, hard to kind of gauge this one. Collaboration tools, people are going all over the place here, just trying new things out. So this question is, what do you do when you get stuck? Well, most people just Google it. Around 89% of the time that's happening. Then visiting Stack Overflow, you have around 80% of the time people visit Stack Overflow. So this one's a little interesting because if you Google things, you might end up at Stack Overflow. So you're going to have a lot of overflow between these two. Haha. So let's check out what professional developers do. There you go. Googling it is just as popular with professionals as well as all respondents, which a few of these last ones are pretty funny. Playing games, panicking, meditating. I'm surprised more people don't meditate over panicking, but this is great to know. So if you're out there Googling things, just understand that everyone else is doing it as well. Don't feel bad about it. It's a way to learn and keep developing your skills. All right, employment statuses. Now we're getting into talking about work here. Employed full-time, 64% of people here who responded to the survey are actually employed full-time. Then you have students being the second most at 14%. Independent contractors or freelancers are 9.6%. Only 3.55% of people are not employed currently, but are looking for work. About 3% employed as part-time people. Students, part-time, about 2.5%. And only about 1.5% of people not employed and not looking for work. This one isn't answered quite as much, only about 15,000 responses here, but you can go between the countries and look and see what kind of demographics for employment statuses do people have by country. Check those out if you're interested. Company information. Most companies are somewhere between the 20 to 100 employee mark at 21%, and following close to second, fair-sized companies around 100 to almost 500 employees at 17.52%. This one's pretty wild, so this is getting into territory like Facebook, Netflix, Apple, and all those FANG companies at around 12.5% with 10,000 employees or more. Quite a few people actually working in that type of a setting as well. So here's what we like to see: a median yearly salary in USD around with all respondents. So these respondents are anywhere in the world, and this is the median. So again, half people earn more, half of people earn less. An engineering manager typically earns more worldwide than a C-level executive. So you could think of this as a CTO versus an engineering manager not quite being that C-level executive, but that's quite fascinating. Next, you have an engineer or site reliability, DevOps specialist, engineer and data, a scientist, a data scientist or machine learning specialist at 63 grand, data or business analyst at around 60.5 grand, a product manager at 60 grand, and then we go all the way down, educators sadly at 53.8. And then this one's interesting, developer for front end is only around 50 grand. Quite interesting because front end development can be pretty hard. And finally, a student, which they're really not doing much developing, if any, is making around 20 grand. In the United States, this is where things start getting wild. The median is around 177.5 for a C-level executive, an engineering manager at 165. Again, half of people earn more than this, half of people earn less. Getting down to some of these other ones, a database administrator around 115, developer in the front end here 115, an educator 115, a system administrator 115. Of course, this is with a lot less responses, around 4 times as less responses, but it's quite interesting to see the various different pay scales. Check this out if you're interested in going into a specific field of development. It might help you make your decision. Well, that's really about it. I covered everything that I wanted to check out. There's actually more to check out. If you want to look at it, make sure to visit that link below. Also, if you haven't already, smash that like button for me. It really does help me out. Catch me in a great community on Discord. Make sure to subscribe below and hit that notification bell for more videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll catch you in another one.